Well, Adam, we are 1 week away from an actual football game we get to cover for the University of Colorado, and sort of wrapping up our week here of Access for the weekend. We're off, but lots of things we went through a couple days ago on a video. Today, let's kind of recap the week a little bit. And I know you talked to Mark Smith, I talked to Darian Hagan and Jared Broussard. We talked to Carl Durrell. I mean, they're all in now on getting ready for UNC. As much as they can see, there's nothing really to look at, but they're preparing as much as they can.
Yeah, and we definitely need a game coming up. I had mentioned the other day when we did an analysis video, hey, we're running out of questions. Today I asked about the long snapper competition, so definitely time to start playing some football games. Derek Bedell, who kind of took that job from Travis Drosos last year, if you guys were following along there, he's going to be the long snapper, and Cameron Warchuk, incoming freshman, is right there nipping at his heels.
Yeah. Well, the good thing for the Buffs is we haven't known the long snapper much over the years because they've had pretty good ones. So there hasn't been a lot of bad snaps. So, good competition there. There's competition in other spots as well. We're going to run through the depth chart here in a minute. But, you talked with Mark Smith. What were your impressions with that interview?
Well, one thing, he was very adamant that had he come in here and didn't know that Nate Landman was coming back from an injury, he wouldn't have noticed it, which is obviously he did because he heard about it and they limited him and all that stuff. But from what he said he's seen from Nate Landman during those live reps this preseason, he hasn't noticed any issue. Now, it's one thing to say that about practice, and we'll see what it looks like on game day. But I asked him, what is that rotation going to look like? And he said, he kind of talked about it in a sense of saying, yeah, Nate Landman's not going to play the number of snaps that he did in the past. But he said when they need Nate to be out there, he'll be out there.
And knowing Nate, he's going to fight Mark Smith for those snaps. But I chatted with Darian Hagan and also Jared Broussard today, obviously about the running back position. And boy, I asked Jared, I said 1 week before a game, and he just got the biggest smile. He cannot wait. That guy is ready to go. Darian Hagan said, I said, is Jared Broussard better? And he goes, oh, he's absolutely better. And much better than he was last year in pass protection and just all the details. All the stuff we've heard about this running back room, Hagan expressed that, Broussard expressed that. These guys are excited. It sounds like that room is ready to go.
Yeah, there's no question about it. You have to go back, I think, to 2002.
Yeah. Since
this program's had that type of depth at tailback. We've hyped up positions in the past based on preseason optimism.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I don't know how it doesn't hold true just because of how much talent those guys all have.
Well, this is one of the first times, you mentioned that there's a lot of potential that we've hyped up before. This is one where, at least with two of those guys, we've seen the production. As long as they're both healthy, we know Alex Fontenot can be a very good running back. We know Jared Broussard can be a very good running back. So, lots of good things coming out of that. Anything else from your impressions of the interviews today?
I talked to Montana Lamonius Craig, and I didn't know this. He actually roomed with Brendan Lewis last year. And so he said it was really helpful. Remember in the spring, Carl Durrell referenced that Montana Lamonius Craig in his second year was kind of a safety blanket for quarterbacks.
Yeah.
It's because I think he, as he said, got to learn this offense through a quarterback's perspective. You couldn't go a whole lot of places last year. You'd get your food and go right back to your dorm room. And so that was a good growth experience for him, having Brendan as his roommate.
Yeah, that's amazing. Had we known that, maybe you project Montana Lamonius Craig better. You had him on the top 40, so maybe you knew all that stuff before. But let's kind of run through a little bit the depth chart. There's not a whole lot we have to hit because there's some positions we know, right? We don't have to talk much about quarterback. Running back, we know it's going to be Broussard, Fontenot, Clayton, Deion Smith, Joe Davis, J.Lee Stacks is going to have a role. Receiver, you mentioned Montana Lamonius Craig. Where does he fit in? What do you see that depth chart looking like at receiver?
I think it's going to be probably pretty close between Dimitri Stanley and Levante Chenault again this year. Maybe Stanley has more catches and Chenault has the yards advantage there. And then I think you go probably Brendan Rice third, but Montana Lamonius Craig is probably in that fourth spot. But you talk to Jalen Jackson, he's going to have a role on this team. Yep. Keith Miller is playing a little bit bigger than he did last year, living up to his size.
Right.
And who am I forgetting there?
Well, Daniel Aries is one
Aries.
We know has had the potential and he's flashed a little bit. If he can put it together, I think he's a big player on this team.
Yeah, you hope it comes together for him. You see him out here in practice just on the hoof. He looks like almost like an NFL type receiver in terms of his body.
Yeah, tight end wise, we know it starts with Brady Russell. Outside of that, where's that competition? Because Matt Lynch, we kind of pencil into that number 2 spot, but I know he's been a little banged up. And there's some young guys that are kind of nipping on his heels.
Alec Pell is my breakout guy there, and I don't mean breakout in the sense he's going to be all conference. If any tight end is going to be all conference, it's going to be Brady Russell. But Alec Pell has that natural aggression that they had to coach him up a little bit because he was more of a running back, H-back type in high school, and then obviously came in here as an inside linebacker. But when you don't have to coach a guy to get a helmet on another guy, get pads on another guy, that's a good starting point, and he's really built on that. I would not be surprised if he sees the second most snaps out of that tight end room this year.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I think Caleb Fourier is going to have a role here as well, more so in the future as we've talked about, but I think he will a little bit this year. I think they want to get him involved for this year, so we'll see what that looks like. Offensive line, we know that's more maybe going to come together as the season goes along because Frank Phillip is going to miss, we think, the first couple games at least. Max Ray, sounds like he's just getting back to practice. We'll see there. But, Adam, I see that offensive line when healthy, Max on the left, and then Kari Kutch at left guard, Colby at center, obviously, Casey Roddick at right guard, and then Frank at right tackle. How do you see it?
I see Kane and Ray probably. I could be wrong here. This isn't. We don't have a depth chart. I would guess he'll maybe start against UNC at right guard just because Casey Roddick didn't get cleared medically until right before camp. So you got to assume there was some rust. He didn't participate in spring ball either. And we've heard good things about Kane and Ray. He's been able to stay healthy here for a while. So that's a spot that'll be interesting to see how it kind of develops as the season goes along. And then Chance Lytle, I think, has kind of worked his way into being a really, really serviceable backup option, a guy that you'd feel really good about going into the game. Well, and Jake Wiley, too, we can't forget him.
Jake Wiley, I think, is going to start the season at right tackle. Chance Lytle's a guy that last year Carl Durrell said he could have an NFL future if he puts it together. I mean, he mentioned that possibility for him. And so, Chance, you got some good backups there. I mean, I feel good about the first, 7, 8, 9 guys on this group. So you got to feel a little bit better about the offensive line now than you did a year ago, even though, like Frank Phillips hurt right now, Casey Roddick's still getting back. Defensive line, the depth and the experience is not there. I like the kind of the top three, I guess. Terrence Lang, Janaz Jordan, Jalen Sami, and I like Naeem Rodman as well. Beyond that, where's the depth?
I think Blaine Toll is going to be a guy that's going to be a real good player here. But again, it's kind of sharpening those, or smoothing out those rough edges that maybe he has at this point. Another guy that you hear is just a super aggressive player out there. So I think he's a guy that maybe early in the season might not have a huge role, but could work his way into a bigger role by the end of the season.
Yeah, Lloyd Murray Jr. is a name that I've heard a little bit more of in the last part of camp, so we'll see. They need a bunch of those young guys to step up on the defensive line. Inside linebacker, we mentioned you talked to Mark Smith. Nate Lamb, we know, is the top guy there. It's going to be interesting, though, to see who plays next to Nate because there's a lot of good candidates there. Yeah,
Jack Lamb was a little bit behind in terms of learning this system just because he didn't get here this summer, but Mark Smith told me that they were actually able to do some Zoom meetings in the spring. So he didn't get those reps in the spring, and we know he played a high level of football at Notre Dame. He's a really smart guy, and so if I had to guess right now, I think maybe Jack Lamb is out there with Nate Lamb for the first snap against UNC, but obviously Robert Barnes is going to have a big role on this team as well.
And John Van Dies, I know, I talked to him earlier this week. He feels like he's better than ever, and so I know that he's played a little bit. His speed has not been the greatest, but I know he's worked on that. So he's a guy that's going to have a role. Quinn Perry, Marvin Ham will be interesting to see how they get in there as well. Outside linebacker, Carson Wells. And then it's the same three we keep hearing about. Joshua Gustav, Jamar Montgomery, Guy Thomas. And even today, Carl Durrell said it all through camp, there's no separation among those three, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They're all playing well, but there's really not a whole lot of separation.
Yeah, we hear there's not a whole lot of separation, yet they're better than they were in the past. So you're not necessarily worried. In fact, you're pretty encouraged by the depth there. It's got to be who makes some big plays early in the season, right, that's going to keep getting the call there. And right now it's impossible to predict who that's going to be.
Safety, that's an interesting spot because you got Isaiah Lewis there coming off a great season, Mark Perry wanting to get better than he was last year, Chris Miller wanting to stay healthy. Those are the top three in my eyes. Where do you see that group?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. The question is, how good is the depth? There are bodies there.
Yeah.
You have Trustin Oliver, who came in from the JC ranks, Curtis Appleton, who was placed on scholarship at the Spring Showcase, and Trevor Woods, I've heard some good things about what he's done in his first camp here. You need those top guys, I think, to stay healthy, at least early in the season until you get those guys behind them acclimated a little bit to game day, and those guys are probably going to help on special teams too. That's one area. You look at depth, you talked about defensive line depth really not being proven at this point. Quarterback, we know there's no depth there. Safety is the other spot that you'd be a little worried, I feel like, going into the season.
Yeah, because I even feel good about corner. With Mekhi Blackman, Christian Gonzalez starting there, Nigel Bethel, I feel pretty good about him. And then they got those young guys, that trio of freshmen that we keep hearing about. They're playing really well and not necessarily looking like freshmen, which is a good thing.
When Mekhi Blackman came in here, I didn't know if he had the frame to ever put on much good weight. That's something that Mel Tucker and even before that Mike McIntyre was really on him about.
Yep.
He looks like a completely different player right now. And so I don't know, I think maybe last year kind of the success he had maybe, and with Turley coming in, also his body, sometimes it just takes guys a little bit longer to physically develop, and it seems to really be coming together for him.
Yeah, he told me at media day he's put on 10 pounds. He's playing at almost 180 now. He came in at 160, several years ago with Mike McIntyre.
I think they were even lying about 160.
Yeah,
honestly.
he was really small back then. Other thing is just special teams, and we know looks like it's gonna be Cole Becker, Josh Watts. Carl Will says had a pretty good camp. And you talked about long snappers, so I actually feel pretty good about the special teams.
If you take what Josh Watts did at the very end of last season and assume that's the punter he's going to be now that he came from Australia, there's an adjustment period there. I think probably mid-level Pac-12 punter with upside on that end. And Cole Becker is the Iceman, so we don't need to say anything more there.
Well, that ought to wrap it up then. This is kind of the end of camp, Adam, and I guess we'll be back next week to preview Northern Colorado.